Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're joining me. I appreciate you clicking on this video. My name is Spencer Allison. I am currently a first year doctoral student in the Counselor Education and Supervision program at William and Mary, and today we will be talking about self-advocate self-advocacy as it relates to clinical supervision. So, just to quickly go over a quick outline of what we'll be discussing today, first we will define what the word advocate and self advocacy actually means. And then, after defining those terms, we will relate it to counseling, specifically the counseling field. And then we will discuss the importance of self advocacy and then sort of get into a short activity, or more so just like a step by step of self advocacy. And then I'll give you a moment to pause and sort of just reflect and consider the step that we're talking about. And then finally, we will talk about what it might look like if you need to go beyond your supervisor and maybe reach out um, because of an ethical concern or something like that. So, hopefully, by the end of this lesson, you will have a better understanding of not only what self advocacy is, but also how it relates to clinical supervision. And then also maybe just some short steps that you can take to help you advocate for yourself in a clinical setting. So, this isn't meant to be a super um, in-depth video. It's just sort of like an overview. So it's definitely a little bit more nuanced and detailed if you were actually self-advocating, but this might be a really good place to start just so you can know sort of what are the things that I need to consider in the event that I do need to advocate for myself or if my needs aren't being met. So hopefully this will serve as just a nice jump start for you in terms of self-advocacy as it relates to clinical supervision. So to start off with, let's define advocate and self-advocacy. So to start with, to advocate, the verb is to speak for, support, or represent a person or group of people who may need extra help or protection. So this is actually something that you have probably done before outside of the counseling session, outside of the counseling setting. And it's probably something that you will do many, many times within the counseling setting. And something similar to advocating is also self advocacy. So, Andrew Lee said, at its heart, self advocacy is the ability to communicate what your needs are. And this is something that is just so essential for people to do in their everyday lives, but especially in the counseling setting, and especially when you're a counselor and you're getting supervision and you need to make sure that you are getting your needs met. So, um, in terms of self advocacy as it relates to counseling, people advocate within the counseling setting all the time. It's actually an ethical imperative, it's in the ethical standards. There's an entire list of competencies related to advocating. So it's something that is necessary in the counseling field. And in order to be a good advocate for others, it's really important to be a good advocate for yourself and just make sure that you are getting the training that you need. And in this instance, that you're getting the supervision you need to be most effective when it comes to supporting your clients and just being an advocate in the field to just support people. So this sort of relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, like I said, self advocacy is necessary in both counseling and supervision. In order to be your best self and to best support clients, it's important that you yourself are taken care of. So, that just reminds me a little bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, if your needs aren't being met, then it's going to be really hard to be an effective counselor. So just looking at this, if you are feeling unsafe in supervision, if you just aren't getting your needs met, if different things are going on that aren't being attuned to, it's going to be really hard to be an effective counselor. So it's just really important that you are able to self advocate and get your needs met. So, in terms of steps for self advocacy, I have listed 5 different steps, and we're just going to go through them. There is an attached handout that you can utilize if you would like, and I'll give you a moment to pause and sort of reflect on each of these steps as we go through them. So, the first step for self advocacy is to understand your needs. So the first thing, maybe not a need, but what do I want out of supervision? Ideally, what would supervision look like? What are the things that I might not necessarily need, but what are the things that I want out of supervision? Um, so just take a moment and consider that, and then a little bit more than just what you want out of supervision would be considering what you need out of supervision. So what are the non-negotiables? What are the absolute things in supervision that you need? And that might relate to you know the amount of times that you're meeting, the frequency of that, the type of supervisor that you have, maybe the modality that they're using, um, just being able to have it be a little bit more informal, more formal. Just what are the absolute things that you need out of supervision? And when you think about your how supervision is currently going, if you have a site supervisor, university supervisor, um, and just sort of considering all of that, what is something that you need more of in supervision? So, how is the experience going for you right now? You might consider pros and cons, the good and the bad, but what is something that in this moment you might need more of in supervision, or that you could see yourself needing more of as you continue to gain experience and expertise in the field of counseling? And then, sort of similar to that, when you consider how supervision is currently going for you, it's also important to think about what's working. What are the good things? Um, what do you enjoy about supervision? What is helpful in supervision? What is helping you become a better counselor in supervision? So, above all of this, it's just important to think about what do I need as a future counselor or as a current counselor to be a better counselor for my clients? How can I support my clients? And how can I support myself? So just take a moment on your handout and just consider these 4 questions. Again, what do you want out of supervision? What do you need out of supervision? What do you need more of out of your current supervision? And then what's currently working for you? So after you understand what your needs are, it's also important to consider your strengths and also consider your boundaries. So, in terms of strengths, um, it's important to one, identify your strengths. This is something that you've probably done with your clients or your students. Is just helping them identify what are their own strengths and how can they use those to approach situations differently or to utilize those to make their lives better in some way. So consider what your own strengths are and how can you use those to better approach a situation just in general. And then obviously, like, what are your strengths and how can that help inform how you advocate for yourself with your supervisor? So it's important to consider strengths, but it's also important to consider boundaries. So there are 2 types of boundaries that need to be considered. The first would be sort of like the counseling, professional, ethical, and legal boundaries that must be set. And then also, what are your personal boundaries? So what similar to what you need, what are the personal boundaries that you have in your own life that sort of go into supervision and might impact the supervision setting? So, again, just take a moment to pause and consider what are your strengths and then also what are your boundaries. So, after you've considered or understand your needs and considered your strengths and boundaries, the third thing to do is to actually address and communicate your needs to your supervisor. So it's important to recognize that ideally supervision would always be wonderful, always be great. But unfortunately, there are times where it's important that we advocate for ourselves, even if it's something really small or if it's something really big. It's important to be able to advocate and communicate your needs to your supervisor directly. So, a few different considerations or ways that you might approach it. Um, One would be to be direct, just explicitly state what you need, explicitly communicate what you need. Next is just be honest, and this is something that can be really difficult to just sort of try to, in terms of being direct and being honest, just trying to sort of beat around the bush a little bit. But it's really important to just be direct and be honest with your supervisor about specifically what you need. If it makes you feel better and it's something that you need, this is definitely something that I need to do whenever I have tough or difficult or um, any type of conversation that may not feel comfortable. I always like to write down my needs on a list, just on a piece of paper or in my notes on my phone, just so I can remember them. So when I get nervous, I can reference them and still be able to clarify and communicate what I need. The next thing is you could always send your needs in an email to prep your supervisor. So just before your supervision, just say, hey, I'd really like to talk about XYZ, um, just so they know, what's coming and they can sort of prepare for that conversation as well. Third, sometimes if it's something that is if it's a conversation or you need something that maybe you feel like your supervisor isn't doing what they need to do, and you feel comfortable addressing that with your supervisor, it might be important to refrain from using accusatory language in some settings. And then finally, just using I statements. So this relates a little bit to the accusatory language, but just making sure that you are using I statements like I feel, I believe, I need, just ways that you can communicate specifically how you're doing and how maybe the supervision setting needs to change in order to best support you. So in turn, you can best support your clients. So again, if you want to take just a quick pause and just maybe I write down three statements of self advocacy. So, what are three specific things that sentences or things that you might be able to say to your supervisor to communicate what you currently need in supervision? So, maybe you foresee something coming up in the future and you just want to write statements about that, or if something's currently going on in supervision, how do you think you might approach that? What are some specific things that you might say? Um, and obviously, you can pay attention to these six different points that I gave you. All right. So after you understand your needs, have considered your strengths and boundaries, and you've actually addressed and communicated your needs, hopefully that will give you and your supervisor an opportunity to work together and collaboratively to identify or refine your goals that you have with each other. So if there's something that if some need is not getting met in supervision and you need to advocate for yourself, it's likely that the goals that you've set out with your supervisor need to be refined or adjusted just a little bit to make sure that in the future, in future sessions, that you are getting what you need out of supervision. So, something that you have probably heard of with goals is it's usually good to set an actionable goal and a realistic goal. So, one way that you can do this is set a SMART goal. And so, a SMART goal, in looking at this chart, would be a goal that is specific, it is measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So just making sure that you are writing a goal again it's actionable. There are specific steps that can be taken, and you can sort of identify when that goal has been met. You can monitor progress in achieving this goal, and that you can also are open to readjusting it if necessary. So this is something that hopefully you will be able to work with your supervisor on. After you've communicated what you need, you can then sort of look ahead and think, okay, this is what I need, and here's how we're going to address that need. So finally, after you have understood exactly what you need, considered your strengths and boundaries, addressed and communicated your needs to your supervisor, and then in turn refine those goals that you have in order to meet your needs. And then finally, it's important to also just know your supports and your resources. So outside of the supervision setting, who are the supports and resources that you can utilize whenever you're having a really tough day, or maybe supervision hasn't been going super well. Maybe your counseling experience hasn't been going super well. So who can you sort of lean on, trust, confide in? And I will say it's important to know your supports and resources, but it's also important to always be cognizant of confidentiality. Just whenever we're working with clients, it is essential to be sure to maintain their confidentiality. So just be aware of that as you are seeking support from different people. So one of the first people that you might think about in this setting, just the people who are instructing you, your professors, they might be good people, might be supportive just because they know, in a way, they know exactly what you're going through. And they can usually take some actionable steps to help you navigate and address your needs. Other professionals and counselors, I know that I worked as a school counselor and I always appreciated being able to go to the other school counselors or the social workers whenever I needed extra support, even if I just needed to debrief or just sit there for a second in silence. They were always there for me to do that. So just other people in the field who may be able to support you. Family members, are always good. You might not be able to talk more as specifically, and sometimes they might not completely understand what you're going to if they're not counselors or therapists or social workers, but they can always be there to support you emotionally. And same with peers and friends, and especially I would emphasize if you're in a cohort or you have classmates who are sort of in the same boat as you currently, they could also be a really good support system. In terms of resources, professional development is always a great way to network with people and to also seek support. Just if you are having a tough case with a client or a student, going to trainings and just sort of like seeing what's out there, what you might be able to do differently. Um, and professional development can be, in addition to supervision, just a really helpful tool in helping you build confidence in your own counseling abilities. Similar to professional development, professional organizations like the American Counseling Association, the American School Counseling Association. They can be really helpful just because it's catered to you. It's catered to these current and future counselors. So it can be a really good place to find support and just find those resources that will help you navigate um, tough times. And also, it can help you identify ways to better advocate for yourself, so you can in turn advocate for your clients and students. Um, as counselors and therapists, it's also important that we ourselves sometimes seek counseling and therapy. So that is something that can also be a really, really great support system, especially in terms of advocacy. That's a great way to advocate for yourself through your own counseling and therapy, and just helping you sort of navigate those really tough conversations that you might be having with your supervisor. And finally, just anyone else, any other trusted people or resources who might help you advocate, or if supervision isn't going super well, or if you need something more in supervision, who are those other trusted people or resources that could help you navigate that? So again, these are the 5 steps to self-advocacy. Again, just understanding your needs. What do you want out of supervision? But what do you absolutely need? What are your non-negotiables when it comes to the counseling setting and supervision setting? Second, just being able to identify your strengths and also your boundaries when it comes to clinical supervision. And then just being able to address and communicate your needs directly and honestly, and it can be really tough to have those conversations, but hopefully being able to understand what you need, and then just being able to address them in a way that is receptive um, will hopefully lead to a good conversation, a productive conversation with your supervisor, so that they can also help you identify goals that you may have to meet those needs or refine those goals that you currently have to better address your needs. So, again, like I've said before, so you can better support your clients or students. And finally, just being able to know your supports and resources in addition to clinical supervision. What are other avenues that you can seek support for what you need, and be a become a better counselor for your clients. So the last thing that I just wanted to touch on briefly, this 5-step guide to self-advocacy is sort of based on um, I would say issues that might not be as in depth and that can be spoken to with your supervisor or communicated with your supervisor, and you can work together to address those needs. But every now and then there might be something that needs to be addressed beyond your supervisor. So maybe if there is a major ethical concern or a legal concern, um, or something sort of comes up that needs to be addressed beyond your supervisor, it's also important to know who to go to and to advocate for yourself in that way. So, the first thing, or the first people that you might consider going to, if it does warrant that, again, if there's an ethical or legal concern, it's important to recognize that maybe you can go to your supervisor's supervisor. If you don't know who that is, wherever you're working at and getting your experience from, you could potentially go to the agency or employer or human resources. And if you're still in a master's program, you could go to your university supervisor and they could probably help you sort of navigate that and just figure out like who you need to go to and how what needs to be addressed specifically. And then also, again, if it's a legal or ethical concern, it might be important to go to or to address that with a state licensing board or different professional organizations that have credentials, just so we can make sure that while supervisors are gatekeepers, we too are gatekeepers of the field, and just making sure that no clients are harmed, no counselors are harmed. So just making sure that in the event that something does happen, that you are aware of who your resources are and how you yourself can not only self advocate, but also advocate for the field in general. That can be really important and necessary sometimes. So that is all that I have to talk to you about today. Again, it's just a brief steps, 5-step way that you can sort of attempt to self advocate. It's not foolproof, but it is a good place to start. So I hope you found this helpful, and I appreciate you watching this video.